When a woman needs you too much, the first place it shows is not in what she says, but in how her world slowly rearranges itself around you. At the beginning, it feels flattering. She prioritizes your time, reshapes her schedule, and adjusts her emotional rhythms to match yours. Most men interpret this as loyalty or deep attraction, and on the surface, it looks like commitment. But psychologically, something far more delicate is happening beneath that devotion. Human beings are wired to seek connection, but healthy attraction is built on choice, not necessity. When her emotional balance starts depending on your presence, the relationship quietly shifts from desire to dependency. You become less of a partner and more of an emotional anchor. Her happiness rises and falls with your attention. Your silence creates anxiety. Your approval becomes fuel. This is not because you are doing something wrong, but because her sense of stability has begun to live outside of herself. In female psychology, emotional security comes from inner regulation first, connection second. When that order reverses, attachment intensifies in ways that feel loving but are actually fragile. She might stop making independent decisions without checking in with you. She waits for your response before feeling okay about her day. She starts measuring her worth through your reactions. And while this seems like closeness, it slowly places invisible weight on the connection. Men rarely notice this early because it doesn't look unhealthy. It looks like affection. It looks like someone who really cares. But over time, the dynamic changes. Attraction thrives on polarity, two whole individuals choosing each other. When one person begins to orbit the other, polarity collapses. Desire doesn't disappear loudly, it fades quietly. What replaces it is emotional pressure. You feel responsible for her moods, her peace, her sense of safety. And responsibility is not the same as attraction. Philosophically, love that is rooted in need creates fear. If you need something to feel whole, you are constantly afraid of losing it. That fear subtly changes behavior. She may become overly accommodating, afraid to disagree, or she may become emotionally reactive, sensitive to small changes in your tone or availability. Either way, the relationship stops being a place of freedom and starts becoming a place of emotional management. This is where many men make the mistake of trying to save the situation by giving more reassurance, more time, more emotional labor. But dependency does not dissolve through excess giving. It deepens. The more you become the center of her emotional world, the less space there is for genuine desire to breathe. Instead of two people meeting in strength, one begins leaning while the other begins carrying. True connection requires emotional self-sufficiency. A woman who loves you in a healthy way wants you, but does not collapse without you. She chooses you, but she is not emptied in your absence. When a woman needs you too much, what she is really asking for, often unconsciously, is stability she hasn't fully built within herself. And no partner, no matter how strong, can permanently replace that inner foundation. The insight here is not to reject her or pull away cruelly. It is to recognize the dynamic and restore balance. Encourage independence. Respect space. Stop confusing intensity with depth. The strongest relationships are not built on emotional dependence, but on mutual strength and voluntary connection. Remember this: love that needs you will drain you, but love that chooses you will elevate you. The second hidden sign appears in her behavior around reassurance and control, and it's far subtler than most men realize. When a woman needs you too much, she doesn't always cling physically or emotionally in obvious ways. Instead, she seeks constant emotional confirmation, not because she doubts you, but because she doubts herself without you. Her nervous system starts treating your attention as proof of safety. This is where excessive checking in begins to look like care. She wants to know where you are, what you're doing, how you're feeling, frequently and consistently. At first, it feels thoughtful. You tell yourself she just wants to feel connected. But psychologically, this behavior often comes from an anxious attachment pattern. Her mind is trying to reduce uncertainty because uncertainty feels like threat. The absence of information creates stories in her head, and those stories create fear. When reassurance becomes a requirement rather than a bonus, attraction quietly changes form. Desire thrives in space, anxiety thrives in proximity. If she needs constant reassurance to feel okay, then your presence is no longer something she enjoys, it's something she relies on. That reliance creates emotional tension, even if neither of you names it out loud. Philosophically, this speaks to the difference between love and fear-based attachment. Love allows the other person to exist freely. Fear tries to manage outcomes. When she needs you too much, her desire to feel secure can turn into subtle control, not domination but influence. She may guide conversations toward emotional validation. She may react strongly when you pull back, even briefly. She may interpret your independence as emotional distance. Men often misread this as emotional depth. They think, she cares so much. But care that requires constant maintenance becomes exhausting over time. You start to feel like you're being monitored rather than chosen. Your autonomy feels questioned, even if she never accuses you of anything, and that feeling changes how you show up. What's important to understand is that this behavior is rarely manipulative. It's protective. Her mind is trying to stabilize an inner sense of worth by anchoring it to your consistency. But the more she seeks reassurance externally, the weaker her internal security becomes. And the more she depends on you for emotional regulation, the more pressure lands on the relationship. There's also a paradox here. The more reassurance she receives, the less it satisfies her long term. Because reassurance doesn't build self-trust. It temporarily quiets fear. And fear always comes back when its source isn't addressed. So she needs more check-ins, more validation, more emotional confirmation just to stay level. What once felt like affection slowly turns into emotional obligation. This is where men often respond incorrectly by over-explaining, over-reassuring, or over-committing emotionally in an attempt to calm the situation. But emotional overcompensation teaches the nervous system that anxiety works. It reinforces the belief that peace comes from external control rather than inner stability. In the long run, this deepens dependency instead of resolving it. A healthier dynamic emerges when reassurance is replaced with consistency and boundaries. Not emotional coldness, but emotional leadership. When you remain steady without feeding anxiety, you model security rather than supply it. This gives her space to reconnect with her own emotional center rather than outsourcing it to you. The deeper truth is this: attraction grows when two people feel safe within themselves, not when one person becomes the emotional lifeline for the other. If she needs you too much to feel calm, the relationship shifts from connection to containment, and containment suffocates desire. So reflect on this carefully. Are you being chosen freely, or are you being used as emotional certainty? Because real love doesn't need constant reassurance to survive. It stands strongest in trust, space, and self-respect. The third hidden sign shows up in how she reacts to your growth, your momentum, and your life outside the relationship. When a woman needs you too much, your independence doesn't inspire her, it unsettles her. Not because she wants to control you, but because your forward motion threatens the emotional balance she has built around your availability. At first, this reaction is subtle. You mention a new goal, a new routine, or a new direction you're moving toward, and instead of curiosity, you feel resistance. It may come as concern disguised as care. Don't burn yourself out. You're changing lately. I just miss how things used to be. These statements sound loving, but psychologically they reveal fear of displacement. Your growth introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty activates anxiety. From a psychological perspective, this is about emotional dependence colliding with self-expansion. When someone relies heavily on you for emotional regulation, your growth can feel like abandonment, even when you're not leaving. Her nervous system interprets your upward movement as emotional distance. So instead of celebrating you, she unconsciously tries to slow you down. This often shows up as guilt, not anger. She may express sadness when you're busy, disappointment when you prioritize your goals, or emotional withdrawal when your attention is divided. The message underneath isn't, I don't want you to succeed. It's, I'm afraid I'll lose my place in your life. But fear rarely speaks clearly. It speaks through mood shifts, emotional silence, or passive resistance. Philosophically, this touches on a crucial truth. Love that is rooted in wholeness expands alongside growth. Love rooted in lack contracts against it. When two people are emotionally self-contained, one person's success becomes shared joy. When one person is emotionally dependent, the other's success feels like a threat to survival. Men often respond to this sign by shrinking themselves. They cancel plans, delay goals, or soften their ambition to keep emotional peace. In the short term, this works. Tension reduces, she feels reassured. But in the long term, attraction erodes. Resentment quietly builds, and self-respect takes a hit. You begin to associate progress with emotional conflict, and de-stagnation with harmony. There's also a deeper dynamic at play here: polarity. Attraction thrives when there is forward motion, purpose, and grounded direction. When you pause your growth to maintain emotional comfort, polarity collapses. You become predictable, emotionally available at the cost of your edge. And ironically, the very thing she feared, losing attraction, starts to happen because growth was sacrificed. It's important to say this clearly: her discomfort with your growth is not cruelty. It's unhealed attachment, but understanding the cause does not mean accommodating the pattern. Healthy relationships do not require self-betrayal to maintain closeness. They require emotional maturity on both sides. The correct response is not to argue, explain, or seek permission to evolve. It's to remain grounded and consistent while continuing forward. When you lead your life without apology, you send a powerful psychological signal. Connection does not require self-erasure. This gives her the opportunity to regulate her emotions internally instead of attaching them to your availability. Over time, one of two things happens. Either she adapts, builds her own emotional stability, and begins to support your growth, or the imbalance becomes too clear to ignore. In both cases, clarity replaces confusion, and clarity is always healthier than silent sacrifice. So ask yourself this: does your presence expand her world, or does it become the center of it? Because real connection thrives when two people walk forward together, not when one stands still so the other doesn't feel left behind. The fourth sign appears in the way she reacts when you pull back, even slightly. Not disappearing, not playing games, just creating normal, healthy space. When a woman needs you too much, even a small reduction in attention can trigger an outsized emotional response. And this reaction reveals less more than words ever could. At first, it may look like confusion. She checks in more often. She asks if something is wrong. She replays conversations you barely remember. But beneath that curiosity is anxiety. Your absence, however brief, disrupts the emotional equilibrium she's built around your presence. You are not just someone she enjoys. You've become a stabilizing force for her inner world. Psychologically, this is known as external regulation. Instead of soothing her own emotions, she relies on your consistency to feel secure. So when your attention shifts because of work, focus, or simply needing time, her nervous system reads it as danger, not because you've done something wrong, but because the attachment has crossed from connection into dependence. This is why her reactions may escalate quickly. What begins as "are you okay?" can turn into emotional distance, passive aggression, or sudden vulnerability. She may become unusually emotional, overly affectionate, or unexpectedly cold. These swings aren't manipulative by design. They're attempts to regain emotional balance by pulling you back into your usual role. Men often misread this sign. They think the solution is reassurance, long explanations, constant texting, or over-availability. And again, in the short term, this works. Her anxiety calms. But it comes at a cost. Each time you rush to restore emotional comfort, you reinforce the belief that her stability depends on your presence. The dependency deepens. There's a philosophical layer here that matters deeply. Real intimacy is not the absence of space. It's the ability to remain connected even when space exists. When closeness requires constant proximity, it's not closeness, it's fragility. A relationship that cannot tolerate distance cannot truly support growth. This sign becomes most visible when you stop initiating everything. You don't disappear. You simply allow silence to exist. And when silence becomes unbearable for her, that tells you something important. It tells you that the relationship is being used to avoid inner discomfort rather than to share mutual strength. The danger here isn't that she needs you. We all need connection. The danger is that you may start managing her emotions at the expense of your own rhythm. You begin anticipating reactions, adjusting behavior, and limiting independence to prevent emotional fallout. Over time, this turns connection into responsibility, and responsibility slowly kills desire. Attraction thrives when both people are emotionally self-sustaining. When you maintain your pace and presence without rushing to soothe every fluctuation, you model stability. And paradoxically, this is what gives her the chance to develop it too. You are no longer rescuing her from discomfort. You are inviting her to grow through it. Some women rise to this. They learn to self-regulate, to trust connection without constant reassurance, and to meet you from a place of emotional balance. Others don't. And that clarity, while uncomfortable, is a gift. It reveals whether the bond is built on mutual strength or emotional reliance. So the question is not whether she reacts when you step back. The question is whether you abandon yourself to keep her calm, because the strongest relationships are not maintained by constant presence, but by two people who can stand firmly, even when space exists between them. The fifth sign shows up in something far subtler, and because of that, men often miss it completely. It appears in how she responds to your independence, not just your time, but your identity, your goals, your routines, your friendships, your sense of purpose outside of her. When a woman needs you too much, your independence doesn't inspire her, it unsettles her. At first, it may seem harmful. She asks more questions about where you're going, who you're with, what you're working on. She frames it as interest, curiosity, or care. But over time, the tone shifts. There's a quiet discomfort when your focus isn't shared, a subtle disappointment when your priorities don't revolve around her. She may joke about being second place or say things like, "You're always busy lately," even when your behavior hasn't changed. Psychologically, this stems from a blurred sense of self. When someone ties their emotional security too closely to another person, that person's autonomy feels like a threat. Your independence reminds her that you are whole on your own, and if she's not equally anchored within herself, that contrast creates tension. Instead of celebrating your drive, she may unconsciously try to pull you back toward emotional centrality. This is where guilt quietly enters the dynamic, not through accusation, but through emotional cues. A sigh when you leave, a shift in mood when you talk about your ambitions, a subtle withdrawal of warmth when your attention is elsewhere. None of it is overt control, but over time, these cues condition behavior. You start hesitating before making plans. You soften your excitement. You shrink parts of yourself to keep the peace. This is one of the most dangerous points in any connection because it feels like compromise, but it's actually erosion. You're not choosing balance, you're trading authenticity for harmony. And the irony is, this never creates real security. The more you bend, the more fragile the bond becomes because it's now dependent on you staying small. From a philosophical perspective, desire is rooted in wholeness. We are drawn to people who stand firmly in themselves, not those who orbit us for validation. When your independence begins to disappear, attraction doesn't increase, it fades. What remains is attack, meant without polarity, closeness without spark. Men often assume that love requires sacrifice of self. But mature connection doesn't demand less of you. It demands more alignment with who you already are. When a woman truly loves you in a healthy way, your independence doesn't threaten her bond with you. It strengthens it. She sees your purpose as an extension of your value, not competition for your attention. If she needs you too much, however, your growth creates inner conflict for her. And unless this dynamic is recognized, it slowly turns into resentment on both sides. She resents feeling emotionally unsafe without you. You resent feeling emotionally responsible for her comfort. Neither of you says it out loud, but both feel it. The key here is not confrontation, it's consistency. You don't need to justify your independence or over-explain your choices. You simply live them calmly without defensiveness or withdrawal. This sends a powerful signal. Connection does not require self-abandonment. Emotional closeness can coexist with personal direction. Some women will rise to this signal. They will recalibrate, rediscover their own center, and meet you from a place of strength. Others will push harder because the bond was never built on balance to begin with. And that response tells you everything you need to know. So reflect on this carefully. Are you expanding in her presence or slowly contracting? Because real connection doesn't ask you to dim your light to be loved. It invites you to stand fully in it and challenges the other person to do the same. The final sign is the one that ties everything together, and it's often the most revealing because it shows up not in what she says, but in how she reacts when you pull back even slightly. When a woman needs you too much, distance, healthy, normal distance, doesn't create reflection or balance for her. It creates anxiety. And this isn't about ghosting or disappearing. It's about moments when you're simply less available. You respond later than usual. You take time to think before replying. You focus on your life instead of immediately centering her emotions. For most secure people, this space is neutral. For someone who needs you too much, it feels destabilizing. You'll notice it in the urgency of her behavior, the double texts, the sudden emotional questions, the subtle testing. Are you okay? Did I do something wrong? You feel different lately? These aren't manipulative in intent. They're revealing in nature. They show that her internal sense of safety depends heavily on your constant emotional presence. From a psychological standpoint, This is where attachment turns into dependency. Instead of regulating her emotions internally, she relies on external reassurance to stabilize her mood. Your attention becomes a coping mechanism. And when that coping mechanism is interrupted, even briefly, her nervous system reacts. This is important to understand because many men misinterpret this reaction as love. They think intensity equals depth. But intensity without inner stability is not intimacy, it's emotional hunger, and hunger is never satisfied for long. Philosophically, this speaks to a deeper truth about human connection. You cannot be the source of someone else's emotional grounding without losing your own. When one person becomes the emotional center of gravity, the relationship tilts. It stops being a meeting of two whole individuals and becomes a structure where one supports the other's weight. Over time, this creates pressure. You begin to feel watched, needed, required, not chosen, required. And that distinction matters. Being chosen feels empowering. Being required feels heavy. Love should feel like freedom with responsibility, not obligation disguised as affection. This is also where resentment quietly begins, not because she's doing something wrong intentionally, but because you sense that your absence causes distress you never agreed to manage. You start carrying emotional responsibility that was never discussed, but is now expected. And the more you comply, the more dependent the dynamic becomes. What's critical here is how you respond. Many men either overcorrect by reassuring constantly or undercorrect by withdrawing completely. Both approaches reinforce the imbalance. Constant reassurance tech as dependency. Complete withdrawal triggers fear. The balanced response is calm consistency. You don't disappear, but you don't rush to soothe either. You stay grounded. You respond when you choose. You don't apologize for having a life, and you don't change your rhythm to manage someone else's anxiety. This does two things. First, it protects your sense of self. Second, it gives her nervous system a chance to recalibrate. Some women will rise into this space. They'll learn to self-soothe, regain emotional independence, and meet you on equal footing. Others will escalate, seeking more control, more reassurance, more closeness, and that escalation is clarity, not conflict. Because the truth is simple but uncomfortable, a relationship cannot be healthy if one person cannot tolerate the other person's autonomy. Love requires space, not distance, but space, space to breathe, space to grow, space to miss each other without fear. When you understand this final sign, you stop chasing intensity and start valuing stability. You stop mistaking emotional urgency for connection, and you begin choosing relationships that expand you instead of consuming you. So ask yourself this, honestly and without ego, does your presence calm her, or does your absence destabilize her? Because real love doesn't collapse in silence. It remains steady, even when you step back. And once you see that clearly, you'll never confuse need with love again.